My daughter Sarah was 32 years old when she died. According to the police, it was a tragic accident. A rainy road, a damaged guardrail, and a car that plunged into a ravine just outside town. The investigation lasted less than a week. The insurance company paid quickly. The case was closed before I had even learned how to breathe without her. 3 days later, I stood at her funeral watching people gather around the grave of the only child I had left after losing my wife 7 years earlier. Friends, co-workers, neighbors, and former classmates came to say goodbye. Many of them cried openly. Some could barely speak. I felt numb, as if part of me had been buried before the ceremony had even begun. Sarah had been the brightest part of my life. She called every Sunday. She never forgot my birthday. She still checked on me after work, even though she was a successful marketing executive with a busy life of her own. She always told me that family came first. Looking at her photograph beside the flowers, I kept asking myself the same question. How could someone so full of life be gone so suddenly? The service went on for nearly an hour. People shared stories about her kindness, her generosity, her ability to make strangers feel like family. Then I noticed something that made me uneasy. Her husband Ethan was standing near the front row. At first, he looked exactly how a grieving husband should look. His head was lowered, his hands were folded. He accepted condolences with quiet gratitude. But every few minutes he checked his phone. That alone wasn't strange. Funerals are chaotic. People call, relatives text. But then I saw it. A smile. Small and quick, but unmistakable. Not a nervous smile. Not the awkward expression people sometimes make when they are uncomfortable. A genuine smile. I blinked and looked again. It was gone. I immediately felt guilty for even thinking about it. Ethan had been part of our family for 8 years. Sarah adored him. Everyone did. He volunteered at local charities. He helped neighbors repair their homes after storms. He remembered anniversaries and birthdays better than anyone I knew. If someone had asked me a month earlier to describe the perfect son-in-law, I probably would have described Ethan. Still, something about that smile stayed with me. As the ceremony ended and people slowly drifted toward their cars, I remained near the grave. I wasn't ready to leave Sarah behind. While everyone else was distracted, I noticed Ethan walking away toward a cluster of trees near the cemetery entrance. He looked around before pulling out his phone. The movement caught my attention. Without really knowing why, I followed from a distance. I stayed far enough back that he wouldn't notice me. A few moments later, he made a call. The wind carried fragments of his voice toward me. "We're fine," he said. Then there was a pause. "No, he doesn't suspect anything." My stomach tightened. Another pause followed. Then Ethan laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh. It lasted only a second. But hearing that sound while my daughter's coffin was still resting beside an open grave sent a chill through my entire body. I moved closer, hoping to hear more. Unfortunately, a truck passed on the nearby road and drowned out the rest of the conversation. By the time the noise faded, Ethan had already ended the call. He slipped the phone into his pocket and walked back toward the parking lot. When he saw me, his expression instantly changed back into the familiar face everyone trusted. "You okay, George?" he asked. I stared at him for a moment. "Just tired," I said. He nodded sympathetically and placed a hand on my shoulder. "We'll get through this together." Any other day, those words would have comforted me. Instead, they made me feel strangely uncomfortable. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen, unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah's face. Then I saw Ethan smiling at her funeral. Around midnight, my phone rang. The number was blocked. For a moment, I almost ignored it. Then I answered. There was silence on the other end. Finally, a woman spoke. Her voice was low and nervous. "Mr. Walker?" she asked. "Who is this?" I replied. "You don't know me," she said. My grip tightened around the phone. "Then why are you calling?" Another pause. Then she whispered something that made my blood run cold. "Your daughter didn't die in an accident." I stood up so quickly that my chair crashed onto the floor behind me. "What are you talking about?" I demanded. "You need to look into Ethan," she said. My heart began pounding. "Who are you?" I asked again. The woman hesitated. Then she spoke one final sentence. Sarah found something she was never supposed to find. Before I could say another word, the call disconnected. I tried calling back immediately, but the number didn't exist. For several minutes, I stood in the dark, staring at my phone. The police said the case was closed. Everyone said it was an accident. But for the first time since Sarah died, grief was no longer the strongest emotion inside me. Suspicion was. And deep down, I knew that when the sun came up, I was going to start digging for answers, no matter where the truth led. The next morning, I woke up after less than 2 hours of sleep. The anonymous woman's words had replayed in my head all night. Your daughter didn't die in an accident. Sarah found something she was never supposed to find. Part of me wanted to dismiss the call as a cruel prank. Grief attracts strange people, but another part of me couldn't ignore what I had seen at the funeral. Ethan's smile, his secret phone call, the way he had laughed while standing only a few yards from the grave of the woman he claimed to love. By 8 o'clock, I was sitting in my truck outside the police station holding a copy of the accident report. I had already read it twice, but this time I forced myself to examine every detail. According to the report, Sarah lost control of her vehicle during heavy rain while driving home from a business dinner. Her SUV crossed the center line, struck a damaged section of guardrail, and plunged nearly 60 feet into a ravine. The conclusion seemed straightforward. Too straightforward. The officer who handled the case told me the evidence pointed to driver error. End of story. Yet the more I read, the more questions appeared. Sarah had driven that same road hundreds of times. She was cautious behind the wheel. She rarely drove fast. And according to the weather records, the rain that night had not been nearly as severe as the report implied. I decided to visit the crash site myself. The road was quiet when I arrived. Traffic was light. The damaged guardrail had already been replaced, but faint tire marks were still visible near the shoulder. I stood there for nearly 20 minutes trying to imagine what had happened. Then something caught my attention. A small roadside convenience store sat less than half a mile from the crash location. Most people would have ignored it. I didn't. Inside, I bought a bottle of water and casually asked the elderly cashier if he remembered the accident from a few days earlier. His face immediately darkened. Hard thing to forget, he said. Poor young woman. I nodded. Did you see anything unusual that night? He hesitated. Depends on what you mean. My pulse quickened. Anything at all? The old man looked around before lowering his voice. About an hour before the accident, I saw someone parked near the overlook. Who? I asked. He shrugged. Couldn't see clearly. Dark SUV. Male driver. Just sitting there. Was he broken down? The cashier shook his head. Didn't look like it. Looked like he was waiting for somebody. I thanked him and left, but his words followed me back to my truck. Waiting for somebody. That afternoon, I requested traffic camera footage from a nearby intersection. I wasn't expecting much. Most recordings are automatically deleted after a few days. Fortunately, a local business owner had already downloaded copies because one of his delivery trucks had passed through the area around the same time. When he learned I was Sarah's father, he agreed to let me review it. We spent nearly an hour scanning footage. Then my heart nearly stopped. There was Sarah's SUV heading toward the highway. Nothing unusual. 23 minutes later, another vehicle appeared. A dark SUV. The same model Ethan drove. I leaned closer to the screen. The timestamp showed it passing through the intersection less than an hour before Sarah's crash. My mouth suddenly felt dry. Ethan had told everyone he was home that evening. He claimed he spent the entire night waiting for Sarah to return from her business dinner. That's what he told the police. That's what he told me. That's what he told every friend and relative who attended the funeral. Yet here was his vehicle heading toward the exact area where Sarah would later die. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe someone else had been driving. Maybe the timestamp was wrong. I wanted desperately to believe one of those possibilities. Instead, I drove straight to Ethan's house. He looked surprised when he opened the door. George, he said, everything okay? I forced a smile. Just wanted to check on you. For nearly 30 minutes, we talked about funeral arrangements, insurance paperwork, and condolences from relatives. Then I casually asked where he had been the night Sarah died. His expression didn't change. At home, he answered instantly. Too instantly. All night? I asked. Yeah. He nodded. Why? I shrugged, just trying to piece together her final day. Ethan looked away for a fraction of a second before meeting my eyes again. I wish I could help more. The conversation continued for another few minutes before I left. As I reached my truck, I glanced back toward the house. Ethan was standing at the front window watching me, not grieving, not confused. Watching. That evening, I received a call from the business owner who had shown me the camera footage. His voice sounded nervous. "Mr. Walker, somebody came by asking about the recording." My grip tightened around the phone. "Who?" There was a long pause. "Your son-in-law." Every muscle in my body went rigid. What did he want? He asked if anyone had been looking at the footage. He seemed worried. After hanging up, I sat alone in silence. The camera footage didn't prove murder. It didn't even prove Ethan had lied. But it proved something else. He was hiding something. And for the first time, I began to wonder if the anonymous caller wasn't warning me about an accident at all. Maybe she was warning me about the man my daughter had married. Then, just before midnight, an email arrived from an unknown address. There was no message, no explanation, only a single attachment labeled, "Read this before Ethan finds it." I stared at the attachment for nearly a minute before opening it. Every instinct told me to be careful. The sender was anonymous. The email contained no message, no explanation, and no indication of who had sent it. But after everything that had happened since Sarah's funeral, I knew I couldn't ignore it. My hands trembled slightly as I downloaded the file. It contained a collection of screenshots, bank records, and several photographs. At first, none of it made sense. Then I noticed a name appearing over and over again. Ethan's. My stomach tightened. The record showed a series of large payments moving through several different accounts over the last 3 years. Some transfers were tens of thousands of dollars. Others were much larger. What immediately caught my attention was the timing. Ethan had always complained about money. Sarah told me more than once that he was struggling with debt from a failed business venture years earlier. Yet according to these records, someone had been depositing enormous sums into accounts connected to him. The photographs raised even more questions. Several showed Ethan meeting with people I had never seen before. In one picture, he was shaking hands with a man outside a luxury hotel nearly 200 miles away. In another, he was sitting at a restaurant with a woman who clearly wasn't Sarah. They weren't behaving like friends. They looked comfortable together, familiar, intimate. I felt sick, not because I believed Ethan was having an affair. At that moment, I honestly didn't care about that. My daughter was dead. Affairs seemed insignificant compared to that. What bothered me was that Sarah had trusted him completely. She defended him whenever anyone questioned him. She believed he was honest. Looking through those photographs, I wasn't sure she had ever truly known the man she married. I spent the next several hours organizing everything into folders. The deeper I looked, the stranger it became. The money wasn't coming from a single source. It was coming from multiple accounts scattered across different states. Some belonged to businesses that appeared legitimate. Others seemed to exist only on paper. By lunchtime, I realized I needed help understanding what I was looking at. Fortunately, my oldest friend Michael had spent 30 years working as a forensic accountant before retiring. When I showed him the documents, his expression grew darker with every page. "George," he finally said, "where did you get these?" "Anonymous email." He nodded slowly. "These transfers aren't normal." "What do you mean?" "I mean, somebody worked very hard to hide this money." My heart pounded. "Illegal?" Michael leaned back in his chair. "I can't prove that yet, but people don't move money through this many accounts unless they're trying to hide something." For the next 2 hours, we reviewed every transaction. Then Michael found something neither of us expected. One account had received a deposit just 4 days before Sarah's death. The amount was $250,000. I stared at the number. "That's impossible." Michael shook his head. "Apparently not. Who sent it?" He zoomed in on the record. A company name appeared. Neither of us recognized it. But what mattered wasn't the sender. It was the date, 4 days before Sarah died. My mind immediately returned to the anonymous caller's warning. Sarah found something she was never supposed to find. Suddenly, that sentence felt less like a mystery and more like a clue. That evening, I drove to Sarah's office, hoping to find answers. Most of her belongings had already been packed into boxes. Her assistant, a young woman named Rachel, was still there finishing paperwork. She looked relieved to see me. "Mr. Walker," she said, "there's something I've been meaning to tell you." My pulse quickened. "What is it?" Rachel hesitated before speaking. Sarah was acting differently the last few weeks. "Differently how?" "Distracted, nervous." She lowered her voice. "She asked me to make copies of several financial documents." I felt a chill run through me. "What kind of documents?" I don't know. She wouldn't say. Rachel glanced toward the empty office. But I heard her arguing with someone on the phone 2 days before she died. Who? I don't know. She swallowed hard. But she sounded angry. Really angry. What did she say? Rachel thought for a moment. The only sentence I remember was, I know what you've been doing. My heart nearly stopped. Sarah had discovered something. The question was what? Before leaving, Rachel handed me a small notebook she found in Sarah's desk. I wasn't sure if this mattered, she said, but she kept this hidden. I thanked her and carried it home. Most of the notebook contained ordinary reminders, appointments, and work notes. Then, near the back, I found a page with a single name written 3 times, Ethan. Underneath it were 4 words written in Sarah's handwriting. Follow the money. I sat frozen for several seconds. Sarah wasn't investigating a stranger. She was investigating her husband. She knew something was wrong before she died. For the first time, I no longer wondered whether Ethan was hiding secrets. I knew he was. The only question was how dangerous those secrets were. Then my phone rang. The caller ID showed Ethan's name. I answered cautiously. George? He said. His voice sounded calm, too calm. I stopped by your house earlier. You weren't there. I was out. Silence. Then he asked a question that made my blood run cold. Have you been looking through Sarah's things? Every instinct screamed at me not to answer honestly. Just trying to stay busy, I said. Another pause followed. Longer this time. Then Ethan spoke again. Be careful, George. Sometimes, digging into the past only makes things worse. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for several seconds. It wasn't a threat, not directly, but it wasn't concern either. It sounded like a warning. And for the first time since Sarah died, I began to suspect that finding the truth might put me in danger too. After Ethan's phone call, I barely slept. His words echoed through my mind for hours. Sometimes digging into the past only makes things worse. It wasn't what he said that bothered me, it was how he said it. Ethan wasn't surprised that I was looking through Sarah's things. Somehow, he already knew. The next morning, I took Sarah's notebook to Michael's house. The words, follow the money, were still burned into my memory. Sarah hadn't written much in the notebook, but what she had written felt deliberate. She wasn't keeping random notes. She was building something. A trail. A case. A warning. Michael spent several hours helping me trace the company that had deposited $250,000 into Ethan's account 4 days before Sarah died. At first, the company appeared legitimate. It had a professional website, a registered business address, and public records. But the deeper we looked, the stranger it became. The address belonged to a shared office building that housed dozens of shell companies. The listed executives didn't seem to exist anywhere else. Their names appeared only on corporate paperwork. One of them had supposedly served as CEO of 6 different companies in 4 states simultaneously. Another had no digital footprint whatsoever. By lunchtime, Michael looked up from his laptop and shook his head. These companies aren't real businesses. Then what are they? I asked. They're fronts. My stomach tightened. For what? He sighed. I don't know yet. That afternoon, I drove to Sarah's house while Ethan was supposedly at work. I still had a spare key from years ago. Part of me felt guilty entering without permission, but another part remembered the notebook, the anonymous phone call, and Sarah's final argument. If she had discovered something dangerous, I needed to know what it was. The house looked exactly as it always had. Family photographs lined the walls. Sarah's favorite books still sat on the shelves. Her coffee mug remained beside the kitchen sink. Walking through the rooms felt like stepping through a memory. For a moment, grief threatened to overwhelm me. Then I remembered why I was there. I started with her home office. Most of her files were gone. Ethan had apparently cleaned the room shortly after her death. That alone struck me as odd. Sarah had been gone only a few days. Why rush? I opened drawers, checked cabinets, looked through boxes. Nearly an hour passed without finding anything useful. Then I noticed something strange. One drawer in her desk seemed slightly shallower than the others. At first I thought I was imagining it. Then I removed everything inside and examined it more closely. A thin wooden panel sat against the back wall. I pressed it gently. Nothing happened. I pressed harder. A small compartment slid open. My heart immediately began racing. Inside was a flash drive and a folded envelope. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. The note inside contained only one sentence written in Sarah's handwriting. If you're reading this, I wasn't wrong. For several seconds I couldn't breathe. Sarah knew. She knew something bad might happen. She knew someone might eventually find this hiding place. And she left a message behind. I rushed home and inserted the flash drive into my laptop. The drive contained dozens of files, bank statements, financial records, copies of emails, screenshots, notes. Sarah had been gathering evidence for months. She wasn't investigating a suspicion anymore. She was building a case. I spent hours reviewing everything. Then I found the document that changed the entire direction of the story. It was a copy of a revised will. Sarah had updated it less than 2 weeks before her death. My eyes moved across every page. When I reached the final section, I understood immediately why Ethan might have panicked. Under the previous will, Ethan inherited nearly everything: the house, savings, investments, insurance benefits. But under the new version, almost all of it was gone. Sarah had removed him almost entirely. A large portion would go to charity. The rest would go into a trust. Ethan would receive very little. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. If Sarah had officially filed this document before her death, Ethan stood to lose millions. Suddenly, the timing of everything felt different. The argument Rachel overheard. The suspicious bank transfers. The anonymous warning. The crash. For the first time, a motive was beginning to emerge. Then I noticed another folder on the flash drive labeled Meeting. Inside was a calendar entry scheduled for the day Sarah died. The appointment was with her attorney. She planned to finalize the new will that afternoon. My pulse quickened. Sarah wasn't planning to remove Ethan eventually. She was planning to do it that very day. I immediately called the law office listed in the calendar entry. After verifying my identity, the attorney agreed to meet me. What he told me made my blood run cold. Sarah never arrived for the appointment. She died only a few hours beforehand. According to him, she sounded extremely anxious during their final conversation. She insisted the paperwork be prepared as quickly as possible. Did she say why? I asked. The attorney hesitated. Only that she had recently learned something about her husband that changed everything. My grip tightened around the phone. Did she tell you what it was? No. His answer came immediately. But she seemed frightened. After ending the call, I sat alone in silence. Every piece of evidence pointed in the same direction. Sarah discovered something. She began investigating Ethan. She changed her will. She scheduled a meeting to finalize it. Then she died before she could sign the documents. The pattern was impossible to ignore, yet I still lacked proof. Suspicion wasn't enough. Motive wasn't enough. If I wanted justice, I needed evidence. As I was organizing the files, my email notification sounded. A new message had arrived from the same anonymous address that sent the financial records. This time there was a short message attached. Only 6 words. You're finally looking in the right place. Beneath the message was a single photograph. When I opened it, my entire body went cold. The image showed Ethan standing beside Sarah's car less than 2 hours before the crash. I stared at the photograph for a long time after opening it. Ethan stood beside Sarah's SUV in a parking lot less than 2 hours before the crash. The timestamp was clearly visible in the corner of the image. My first reaction was disbelief. Ethan had repeatedly claimed he hadn't seen Sarah that entire day. He told the police he was home waiting for her. He told friends the same story. He told me the same story. Yet here he was standing beside her vehicle shortly before she died. The photograph alone didn't prove murder, but it proved something almost as important. Ethan had lied. The question was why. I enlarged the image and noticed Sarah wasn't visible anywhere in the frame. Ethan appeared to be looking around, almost as if he wanted to make sure nobody was watching him. Then I noticed something else. The parking lot belonged to a private office complex on the other side of town. Sarah had no reason to be there. Neither did Ethan. My pulse quickened. Whatever happened that afternoon, it wasn't random. Someone had arranged it. I immediately forwarded the photograph to Michael. Less than 20 minutes later, he called me back. George, look at the background. I zoomed in again. At first, I didn't understand what he meant. Then I saw it. Reflected in the glass behind Ethan was another person standing nearby. The reflection was blurry, but recognizable enough to identify one thing. It wasn't Sarah. It was a woman. the same woman I had seen in several photographs from the anonymous email. Suddenly, the pieces started moving into place. Ethan wasn't acting alone. The mysterious woman had appeared in financial records, photographs, and now a picture taken shortly before Sarah's death. Whoever she was, she mattered. That evening, I returned to Sarah's files. Hours passed as I searched through emails, notes, and downloaded documents from the flash drive. Then I found a folder I had overlooked earlier. The title was simple, personal. Inside were dozens of screenshots from Sarah's phone. Most appeared ordinary until I noticed a pattern. Sarah had been documenting suspicious behavior for months. Unexplained trips, missing money, phone calls that ended whenever she entered a room. Meetings Ethan claimed were business-related, but never appeared on his calendar. Sarah wasn't gathering information casually. She was building evidence. Then I found a screenshot that made my blood run cold. It showed a text conversation between Sarah and one of her closest friends. The date was only 6 days before her death. Sarah had written, "If anything happens to me, don't believe what Ethan says." I read the sentence 3 times. Then again, Sarah wasn't worried about divorce. She wasn't worried about an affair. She was afraid, truly afraid. For the first time, I began wondering how long she had known she was in danger. My phone rang shortly after midnight. The caller ID displayed Ethan's name. I hesitated before answering. "George," he said, "I wanted to check on you." His voice sounded calm and friendly, exactly as everyone expected. "I'm fine," I replied. "Good." A pause followed. "Have you found anything unusual in Sarah's things?" The question hit me like a punch. "Why would I?" I asked carefully. "No reason." Another pause. "Just making sure there isn't anything important that should be handled legally." I said nothing. Ethan continued. "There are financial matters that need attention. Insurance paperwork, property documents, things like that." There it was, money. Again, even with Sarah gone, Ethan's focus kept returning to finances. The conversation ended a few minutes later, but the feeling stayed with me. He wasn't checking on me. He was checking on the evidence. The next morning, I met with Sarah's attorney in person. I needed answers about the revised will. After reviewing several documents, he confirmed my worst fear. Sarah had intended to officially finalize the changes on the day she died. If she had lived just a few more hours, Ethan would have lost nearly everything. Millions of dollars, property, investments, insurance benefits. The attorney leaned forward. "Mr. Walker, there's something else." My heart sank. "What?" He opened a folder and slid a document across the desk. "Your daughter asked me to prepare a sworn statement." I stared at him. "About what?" "She never completed it." His expression darkened. "But according to my notes, she planned to accuse her husband of financial fraud." For several seconds I couldn't speak. The room felt smaller, hotter. He continued. "She said she had discovered evidence that money was being moved through accounts connected to Ethan." I immediately thought about the hidden transfers Michael found. The shell companies, the anonymous deposits. Sarah had uncovered the same trail before she died. "Did she tell you who else was involved?" I asked. The attorney shook his head. "Only that she believed Ethan wasn't working alone." As I left the office, one thing became painfully clear. Sarah wasn't killed because of a random argument. She wasn't killed because of a simple inheritance dispute. She was getting close to something much bigger, something valuable enough to kill for. That evening I parked outside Ethan's house and watched from across the street. I hated myself for doing it, but I needed answers. Around 9 o'clock, a black sedan pulled into the driveway. A woman stepped out. Even from a distance, I recognized her immediately. The same woman from the photographs, the same woman from the reflection. She wasn't hiding. She walked directly to the front door. Seconds later, Ethan let her inside. I checked the time. She remained there for nearly 2 hours. When she finally left, I followed her. 20 minutes later, she arrived at an expensive condominium downtown. I stayed in my truck until the lights came on inside her apartment. Then I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. A man was already waiting for her. Not Ethan, someone else. Suddenly, the story became much larger than a cheating husband and a suspicious death. There were more players involved than I realized, and as I sat there watching shadows move behind the apartment windows, I had the terrifying feeling that Sarah hadn't stumbled onto one secret. She had stumbled onto an entire operation. I sat in my truck for nearly 30 minutes watching the lights inside the condominium. The woman I had followed from Ethan's house clearly wasn't just a secret girlfriend. If that were the case, none of this made sense. Sarah wouldn't have spent months collecting financial records. She wouldn't have changed her will. She wouldn't have told her attorney she was preparing to accuse Ethan of fraud. And she definitely wouldn't have told a friend. If anything happens to me, don't believe what Ethan says. Whatever Sarah discovered, it was bigger than an affair. Eventually, the lights inside the apartment went dark. I took one last look at the building before driving home. The next morning, I called Michael and told him everything. The woman, the condominium, the unknown man waiting inside. He listened carefully before saying something that immediately caught my attention. "George, if this is some kind of financial operation, there should be a connection between the people involved." "What kind of connection?" I asked. "Money leaves fingerprints." By noon, we were digging through public records again. The woman turned out to be named Vanessa Cole. On paper, she worked as a consultant for multiple businesses across 3 states. But the deeper we looked, the stranger her history became. Vanessa seemed connected to several companies that existed only for a few years before disappearing. Every time one company dissolved, another appeared. Different names, different addresses, same people, same patterns. Then Michael found something neither of us expected. Vanessa's name appeared in records linked to one of the shell companies that had transferred money into Ethan's account. I felt my stomach tighten. "So, Sarah was right." Michael nodded slowly. "Looks that way." But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part came 20 minutes later. While searching archived business registrations, Michael discovered another familiar name, the unknown man from the condominium. His name was Richard Haynes. According to official records, he had previously served as an executive in several companies that later became subjects of fraud investigations. None of the cases resulted in criminal charges, but the pattern was impossible to ignore. Failed companies, missing investors, vanishing funds, then Richard would move on and start over somewhere else. The more we learned, the more one possibility became impossible to avoid. Ethan wasn't simply hiding money. He was part of something organized, something that had likely been operating for years. That evening, I returned to Sarah's flash drive. There had to be more evidence hidden somewhere inside. After nearly 2 hours of searching, I found a password-protected folder I hadn't been able to open before. Sarah had left a clue inside her notebook, a date circled 3 times in red ink, her wedding anniversary. I entered the date. The folder opened immediately. What I found inside made my blood run cold. Sarah had recorded herself on video. She sat alone in her office, looking exhausted. Her eyes were red, as if she hadn't slept in days. She stared directly into the camera. "If you're watching this," she began, "something has probably happened to me." My heart stopped. I watched every second without moving. Sarah explained that she had spent months investigating suspicious financial activity connected to Ethan. At first, she thought he was having an affair. Then she discovered hidden bank accounts, shell companies, unexplained transfers. The deeper she dug, the worse it became. "I think Ethan is working with people who steal money from wealthy families," she said. "I don't know exactly how the operation works yet, but I know they're targeting victims through relationships and business partnerships." She paused before continuing. "And I think they know I'm getting close." Hearing those words from my daughter's own mouth felt like being punched in the chest. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't speculating. She was afraid. Genuinely afraid. Then she revealed something even worse. 2 weeks earlier, she had confronted Ethan privately. Instead of denying the accusations, he became furious. He demanded to know how much she had learned. According to Sarah, it was the first time during their marriage that she felt physically threatened by him. The video ended with a final warning. "If anything happens to me, don't let Ethan control the narrative." I sat frozen long after the screen went dark. Sarah knew she was in danger. She knew far more than any of us realized, and she had been trying desperately to leave a trail behind. My phone rang unexpectedly. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Normally I would have ignored it. This time I answered. The voice on the other end belonged to a man. "Mr. Walker?" "Who's this?" I asked. "My name is Daniel Ross." His voice sounded nervous. "I think your daughter contacted me a few weeks ago." My pulse quickened. "Why?" There was a pause. Then he said something that changed everything. Because my sister died under circumstances very similar to your daughter's. I nearly dropped the phone. Daniel explained that his sister had married a wealthy businessman 3 years earlier. Less than a year later, she died in what police ruled an accident. Months afterward, Daniel discovered evidence of financial fraud connected to several shell companies. Some of the names matched the ones Sarah had been investigating. Then he said the words I had been dreading. Your daughter wasn't the first. A cold wave of fear swept through me. What do you mean? His answer came immediately. I think there are others. We arranged to meet the following day. After hanging up, I sat alone in silence. For days, I had been trying to understand why Sarah died. Now, a far more terrifying possibility was emerging. What if Sarah wasn't the only victim? What if Ethan and the people around him had been doing this for years? And if that was true, how many lives had already been destroyed before my daughter discovered the truth? As I prepared for bed, a notification appeared on my phone. A security camera alert from outside my house. I opened the live feed and felt my blood turn to ice. A man was standing across the street watching my home. He wasn't moving. He wasn't hiding. He was simply standing there in the darkness, watching. And when he slowly lifted his head toward the camera, I realized I had seen his face before. He was the same man who had been waiting inside Vanessa's condominium. I didn't sleep at all that night. For nearly an hour, I sat in my living room staring at the security camera footage. The man remained across the street, standing beneath a broken streetlight. He wasn't pretending to walk a dog. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't waiting for anyone. He was watching my house. Eventually he left, disappearing into the darkness before I could get outside. But the message was clear. Someone knew I was investigating. Someone knew I was getting closer to the truth. The following morning, I met Daniel Ross at a small diner 2 towns away. I deliberately chose a public place. By then, paranoia was becoming a survival instinct. Daniel arrived carrying a thick folder. He looked exhausted, older than his age, the kind of face you see on people who have spent years carrying unanswered questions. After a brief introduction, he opened the folder and spread several photographs across the table. My stomach tightened immediately. The first photo showed a smiling woman standing beside a luxury yacht. The second showed her wedding day. The third showed a funeral. That's my sister, Emily, Daniel said quietly. She died 3 years ago. I studied the photographs. The similarities to Sarah's case were impossible to ignore. Emily married a wealthy man. Less than a year later, she died in what authorities ruled an accident. Her husband inherited most of her assets. The investigation ended quickly. Nobody asked questions. Nobody looked deeper. Daniel slid another document toward me. Look at the company names. My pulse quickened. Several matched the shell companies Sarah had been tracking. Others were connected to Vanessa and Richard. The pattern was becoming undeniable. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a system, a business model, a criminal enterprise disguised as relationships and investments. How many? I asked. Daniel looked down before answering. At least 5 that I know about. The number hit me like a punch. 5 dead women, 5 families destroyed, 5 investigations closed. And somehow Ethan was connected to all of them. For the next 2 hours, Daniel walked me through everything he had uncovered over the years. The group targeted wealthy individuals, usually people with substantial assets or family inheritances. Relationships were carefully cultivated. Trust was established. Financial control followed. Then, when circumstances aligned, tragedy struck. Sometimes it was an accident, sometimes an overdose, sometimes a mysterious medical emergency. Every case appeared unrelated, but beneath the surface, the same names kept reappearing, the same companies, the same financial transfers, the same people. Ethan wasn't simply participating, he appeared to be one of their most successful operators. Hearing those words made me physically sick. My daughter had spent 8 years married to a man who may have viewed her as nothing more than a target. Then Daniel revealed something that shocked even him. A week before Sarah died, she contacted him directly. She had discovered his online posts about Emily's death and reached out privately. At first, Daniel assumed she was another grieving family member. Then she started asking questions. Very specific questions. Questions only someone actively investigating the organization would ask. She was close, Daniel said. Closer than anyone else. My chest tightened. Sarah wasn't randomly uncovering clues anymore. She was approaching the center of the operation, which meant she had become a threat, a dangerous one. Before leaving, Daniel handed me a flash drive. "Everything I have is on here." I stared at it for several seconds. "Why give it to me?" He met my eyes. "Because your daughter was the first person who ever believed me." The drive contained years of research, news articles, financial records, court filings, personal notes, and one name that appeared again and again: Richard Haynes. According to Daniel's findings, Richard wasn't merely involved. He was likely running the entire operation. Vanessa handled financial logistics. Ethan recruited targets and maintained relationships. Others played supporting roles. Together, they formed something far more sophisticated than ordinary fraud. By evening, I felt overwhelmed by the sheer size of what Sarah had uncovered. Yet one question continued bothering me. If this organization was so careful, why were they suddenly making mistakes? Why did anonymous people keep sending me evidence? Why had someone warned me after the funeral? It didn't make sense, unless someone inside the group had turned against them. That possibility stayed with me all night. Around 10 o'clock, I received another anonymous email. Unlike the previous messages, this one contained only a single sentence: "Stop looking at Ethan and start looking at Richard." Attached was a PDF file. Inside were travel records showing Richard, Vanessa, and Ethan all meeting together in multiple cities over several years. But one detail immediately stood out. 6 days before Sarah's death, all three had gathered at a private lodge outside the city. According to receipts attached to the file, the meeting lasted nearly 8 hours. My pulse accelerated. Sarah confronted Ethan shortly afterward. Then she scheduled the meeting to change her will. Then she died. The timeline fit too perfectly to ignore. I was still reviewing the documents when someone knocked on my front door. 3 slow knocks, deliberate, heavy. My heart immediately began racing. It was nearly midnight. Nobody visited at that hour. I moved quietly toward the window and peeked through the blinds. A man stood on the porch. He wore a dark jacket and baseball cap. For a second, I couldn't place him. Then recognition hit me. It was the man from the security camera, the same man who had watched my house the night before. He wasn't hiding anymore. He wanted me to know he was there. Another knock echoed through the house, this time louder. Then my phone vibrated. An unknown number. With trembling hands, I answered. A voice I didn't recognize spoke immediately. "Don't open the door, George." Every muscle in my body froze. "Who is this?" I whispered. The caller ignored the question. "Listen carefully. The man outside isn't there to scare you." A pause followed. Then came the sentence that changed everything. "He's there because Richard finally knows what Sarah discovered." I stood frozen in the dark hallway with the phone pressed against my ear while the man outside knocked again. 3 heavy knocks, slow, patient, like he knew I had nowhere to run. The voice on the phone stayed calm, but there was urgency underneath it. "Do not speak. Do not turn on any lights. Walk away from the door." I did exactly what he said. My legs felt weak as I backed into the kitchen. "Who are you?" I whispered. "Someone who owes Sarah more than silence." The caller answered. Outside, the knocking stopped. Through the kitchen window, I saw the man move off the porch and walk toward the side of the house. He wasn't leaving. He was checking entry points. My hand tightened around the phone. "He's going around back," I whispered. "Basement door?" the caller asked. "Yes. Lock it now." I rushed down the short hallway to the basement steps and checked the deadbolt. It was already locked, but a second later the handle moved from the outside, slowly. Once, twice, then a hard shove rattled the frame. My heart slammed against my ribs. "Call 911, the caller said. I had already started dialing on my second phone. Within seconds, the dispatcher was on the line, and officers were being sent to my address. The man outside must have seen the motion light flash, because he stepped back into view, looked directly at the security camera, and smiled. Then he walked away. No hurry. No panic. Just disappeared down the sidewalk as if nothing had happened. The police arrived 11 minutes later. They checked the property, took my statement, and reviewed the footage. The responding officer suggested it might have been an attempted burglary. I almost laughed. Burglars don't knock first. Burglars don't smile at cameras. Burglars don't appear the same night I receive files connecting my son-in-law to a criminal organization. But I didn't say all of that. Not yet. After the officers left, I called the unknown number back. This time, the caller answered immediately. "You need to stop using your home Wi-Fi," he said, "and stop opening files on your personal laptop." "Who are you?" I demanded. A long silence followed. Then he said, "My name is Marcus Vale. I used to work for Richard." The room seemed to tilt. Used to? Until Sarah found me. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. Marcus explained that he had once handled digital records for Richard's network. Shell companies, encrypted transfers, internal communications. He wasn't proud of it. At first, he told himself it was only money. Rich people hiding assets. Quiet consulting work. Then Emily Ross died. Then another woman in North Carolina. Then another in Florida. By the time Marcus realized the operation wasn't just fraud, he was already too deep. "Why didn't you go to the police?" I asked. His answer came quickly. "Because Richard had people inside local departments. Not everywhere, but enough. Enough to make evidence disappear. Enough to make complaints look crazy." My mind went straight to Sarah's accident report. Closed in less than a week. Driver error. No deeper investigation. "Sarah contacted you?" I asked. 3 weeks before she died, Marcus said. She had found one of Richard's old companies and traced it back to me. She was careful, smarter than the others. She didn't accuse me. She asked questions that proved she already knew too much. "And you helped her?" "Not enough." His voice cracked for the first time. "I gave her partial records. I told her to get out quietly, change her will, protect her assets, and go federal. I thought she still had time." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then Marcus said, "Richard found out after the lodge meeting." Ethan told him. I closed my eyes. The private lodge. The 8-hour meeting. 6 days before Sarah's death. "What happened there?" I asked. Marcus hesitated. Ethan wanted time. He thought he could control Sarah, convince her, maybe scare her into staying quiet. Richard didn't trust him. Vanessa argued that Sarah had become a liability. By the end of that meeting, they agreed she couldn't be allowed to reach her attorney. My breath caught. "Are you saying they planned her death there?" "I'm saying the decision was made there. For the first time since Sarah died, the vague shape of suspicion became something solid and horrifying. My daughter hadn't died because Ethan panicked in a moment of rage. She had died because a group of people sat in a private lodge and discussed her like a business problem." Marcus continued, "But there is still a way to prove it." "How?" "Richard records everything. Not because he's careless. Because he trusts no one. Every major meeting has audio. He keeps leverage on his own people." My pulse quickened. "Do you have the recording?" "No," Marcus said. "But I know where it is." The answer should have given me hope. Instead, it filled me with dread. Marcus explained that Richard kept sensitive files on an offline drive inside a private storage unit registered under one of Vanessa's companies. Sarah had discovered the unit but never got inside. "If that recording exists," Marcus said, "it could prove conspiracy." I looked toward the window, half expecting the man to return. "Why tell me now?" "Because Richard already knows Sarah made copies. He doesn't know who has them. He thinks it might be you." That explained the man outside my house. They weren't only trying to scare me. They were searching for whatever Sarah had left behind. The next morning, I met Daniel and Michael at Michael's office. I told them everything Marcus had said. Daniel looked pale but determined. Michael wanted to contact federal authorities immediately. I agreed in principle, but there was a problem. We still had scattered evidence, not the one thing that could connect Ethan, Vanessa, and Richard directly to Sarah's death. We needed the lodge recording. Marcus refused to meet in person, but he sent the storage unit details through an encrypted message. The unit belonged to a company called Northline Asset Management. Michael recognized the name immediately. It appeared in 3 of the shell company records Sarah had saved. The facility was located outside the city near an industrial park. We didn't break in. That would destroy everything legally. Instead, Michael searched public records, while Daniel contacted an attorney he trusted from Emily's case. By late afternoon, we learned something important. The storage unit was overdue for payment. Under facility policy, units with overdue balances could be accessed by management for inventory after formal notice. It was a slim opening, but not enough. Then Marcus sent another message. Vanessa will visit the unit tonight. She is moving files. Suddenly waiting wasn't an option. Daniel insisted on calling the FBI tip line immediately. This time, I didn't argue. We submitted everything we had. Sarah's video, the financial records, Daniel's files, the lodge receipts, the photograph of Ethan beside Sarah's car, the attempted intimidation at my house, and Marcus's information. The agent who called back 2 hours later didn't sound dismissive. He asked specific questions: names, date, returns, accounts, locations. When he heard Richard Haynes, his tone changed. "Do not approach the storage facility," he said. "Do not contact Ethan. Do not contact Vanessa. If anyone comes to your home again, call us directly." That was the first time I realized this wasn't only my investigation anymore. Something larger had opened. Something official. Something Ethan couldn't charm his way out of. But I also knew federal investigations took time, and Vanessa was moving files that night. If those files disappeared, the lodge recording might disappear with them. Around 11:30, Daniel called me from his car. "I'm outside the storage facility," he said. My blood turned cold. "Daniel, the FBI told us not to go near it." "I know," he said, "but Vanessa just arrived." I grabbed my keys and drove faster than I should have. When I reached the industrial park, Daniel's car was parked behind a closed auto shop across the road. We watched from the shadows as Vanessa opened the storage unit and carried out 2 hard cases. A black sedan idled nearby. Then Ethan stepped out of the passenger side. Seeing him there erased the last piece of doubt I had been clinging to. He wasn't being manipulated. He wasn't a weak husband caught in a bad situation. He was still actively helping them destroy evidence from the death of my daughter. Daniel whispered, "We need pictures." He lifted his phone and started recording. Vanessa handed Ethan one of the cases. Then Richard emerged from the driver's seat. Even from a distance, I recognized the face from the condominium and my security camera. He spoke briefly to Ethan. Ethan looked nervous. Richard did not. Then something happened none of us expected. Ethan opened the case, looked inside, and immediately shook his head. His voice carried faintly through the cold night air. This wasn't part of the deal. Richard stepped closer. Vanessa looked toward the road. Daniel lowered his phone slightly. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded. But before either of us could move, headlights exploded behind us. Another vehicle had pulled into the alley, blocking our exit. 2 men stepped out. At the same moment, Richard turned his head and looked directly toward our hiding place. He knew we were there, and as Ethan slowly turned and saw me across the road, the expression on his face told me the truth. He wasn't surprised. He had been expecting me. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Richard stood beside the black sedan, staring directly toward our position, while Ethan remained frozen with the hard case still in his hands. The expression on Ethan's face told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't shocked to see me. He wasn't confused. He wasn't wondering why I was there. He looked like a man watching a problem finally catch up with him. Then one of the men behind us shouted, "Get out of the car." Daniel cursed under his breath. The alley was blocked. The storage facility was ahead of us. Richard's people were behind us. We were trapped. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Daniel slowly lowered his window. "We don't want trouble," he said. One of the men laughed. "That's funny, because you've been causing a lot of it." The second man stepped closer. Then something unexpected happened. Red and blue lights exploded across the industrial park. Sirens erupted from multiple directions. Within seconds, unmarked vehicles flooded the area. Doors flew open. Agents poured out shouting commands. "Federal agents, nobody move." Chaos followed. One of the men behind us tried to run. He made it less than 10 feet before agents tackled him to the ground. Vanessa dropped one of the hard cases. Richard spun toward his vehicle. Ethan stood frozen. For the first time since Sarah died, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. The FBI had arrived. Someone must have acted immediately after reviewing our evidence. Agents surrounded the storage facility within seconds, weapons drawn, commands shouted. The entire operation collapsed before my eyes. Richard attempted to reach the driver's door but was intercepted by 2 agents. Vanessa was handcuffed near the entrance. Ethan remained standing beside the open case, looking completely lost. Then an agent approached me. "George Walker?" I nodded. "You're going to want to see this." He pointed toward the hard case Vanessa had dropped. Inside were stacks of documents, external drives, and several folders marked with company names I immediately recognized from Sarah's files. But what caught my attention wasn't the paperwork. It was a small digital recorder resting in a padded compartment. The agent carefully lifted it. "This might be what your daughter was looking for." My pulse accelerated. The lodge recording, the one Marcus had described, the one that could prove everything. We spent the next several hours at a federal field office giving statements. The atmosphere was tense. Agents moved constantly between rooms. Phones rang non-stop. Evidence was cataloged and reviewed. Shortly after sunrise, a senior investigator entered the room where Daniel and I were waiting. His expression told me something important had happened. "We recovered the recording," he said. My chest tightened. "And?" He placed a transcript on the table. "You should read this." My hands trembled as I scanned the pages. At first, it sounded like an ordinary business meeting. Financial discussions, asset transfers, risk assessments. Then the conversation changed. Richard's voice became sharper, more direct. Vanessa discussed Sarah's investigation. Ethan admitted Sarah had discovered hidden accounts. My pulse raced faster with every line. Then I reached the section that made my blood run cold. Richard asked a simple question. "Can she be controlled?" Ethan hesitated before answering. "Not anymore." Silence followed. Then Vanessa said, "If she reaches the attorney, everything falls apart." The next page was even worse. They weren't arguing about whether Sarah was a threat. They were discussing what to do about her. Different options, different outcomes, different risks, like executives discussing a business problem. Then came the sentence that shattered me, Ethan's voice, clear and unmistakable. "Whatever happens, it has to be before the will is finalized." I stopped reading. My vision blurred. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. Sarah wasn't collateral damage. She wasn't accidentally caught in something dangerous. She had been deliberately targeted because she threatened their money, because she chose to expose them, because she refused to stay silent. The investigator waited quietly while I gathered myself. Then he spoke. "There's more." He opened another folder. Inside were financial records recovered from the drives. The evidence went far beyond Sarah's case. Dozens of shell companies, millions of dollars, multiple victims. The operation had been active for nearly a decade. Emily Ross wasn't the first victim. Sarah wasn't the last intended victim. There were others. Families who never knew the truth. Cases closed as accidents. Lives destroyed for profit. By afternoon, news of the arrests began spreading. Richard, Vanessa, several associates. Headlines appeared across local media. Yet one thing continued bothering me. Ethan had not confessed. He had not cooperated. He had immediately requested an attorney. The investigators believed the evidence was overwhelming, but I knew Ethan. He would try to save himself. He would blame Richard, blame Vanessa, blame everyone except himself. Then, another surprise arrived. Marcus finally agreed to meet in person. The meeting took place under federal supervision. He looked older than I expected, tired, haunted. The guilt showed on his face before he even spoke. "I'm sorry about Sarah," he said quietly. I nodded. Part of me wanted to hate him. Another part understood that without Marcus, we might never have uncovered the truth. He spent hours helping investigators decode records and identify victims. Then he revealed something nobody expected. Richard had maintained a private archive separate from the storage unit. Insurance against betrayal. Insurance against Ethan. Insurance against everyone. "What's in it?" an investigator asked. Marcus looked directly at me. "Videos." The room fell silent. "What kind of videos?" Marcus swallowed hard. "Meetings, conversations, planning sessions." My stomach tightened. "Including Sarah?" Marcus nodded. "Including Sarah." The archive was recovered 2 days later. The contents were devastating. Ethan appeared in multiple recordings, discussing victims, financial strategies, and ways to manipulate investigations. There would be no escaping responsibility now. No misunderstanding. No innocent explanation. Then investigators found something else. A recording made the day before Sarah died. She had secretly recorded a conversation with Ethan inside their home. In the video, Sarah confronted him with evidence of fraud. She demanded answers. She threatened to go to federal authorities. Ethan repeatedly denied everything. Then, near the end, His mask slipped. For a brief moment, the charming husband disappeared. The man on the screen looked cold, angry, dangerous. "You don't understand who you're dealing with," he told her. Sarah refused to back down. The recording ended shortly afterward. Watching it broke my heart. Sarah knew she was standing alone. She knew she was taking a risk. Yet she kept fighting anyway. She was braver than any of us realized. That evening, after leaving the federal office, I visited her grave for the first time since the funeral. The sun was setting. The cemetery was empty. I stood there in silence for several minutes. Then I told her everything. The arrests, the recordings, the evidence. The truth finally coming to light. For the first time since she died, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope, real hope. The people responsible were finally being exposed. Justice was finally within reach. Then my phone rang. The call came from the lead investigator. His voice sounded serious. "George, we have a problem." My stomach immediately tightened. "What happened?" There was a pause. Then he delivered the one piece of news I never expected to hear. "Ethan is willing to testify against Richard." I frowned. "Isn't that good?" The investigator's silence lasted several seconds. Then he said, "Not if Richard gets to him first." The moment the investigator told me Richard might try to silence Ethan, I understood how dangerous the situation had become. Until then, Richard had viewed Ethan as a partner, a useful asset, someone who helped recruit targets and keep operations running smoothly. But now, Ethan had become something else, a witness. And witnesses were far more dangerous than enemies, especially witnesses who knew where the bodies were buried. The FBI immediately moved Ethan to a secure holding location. His attorney negotiated for cooperation. In exchange for testimony, prosecutors were willing to discuss a reduced sentence. The news made me sick. Part of me wanted Ethan to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Another part understood the reality. If his testimony helped expose the entire organization, it might save future victims. The next several days became a race against time. Investigators worked around the clock, reviewing evidence recovered from Richard's archive. Every hour revealed something worse. More victims, more shell companies, more fraudulent transfers. What had started as the suspicious death of my daughter was rapidly turning into one of the largest financial crime investigations in the region's history. Then, the first attack came. A transport vehicle carrying one of Richard's associates was deliberately rammed by a stolen truck while traveling between facilities. The associate survived, barely. The message was clear. Someone was trying to eliminate witnesses before they could testify. Security around Ethan was doubled immediately. Yet the threat only seemed to grow. During one briefing, the lead investigator explained that several members of Richard's network remained unidentified. "We know about Richard, Vanessa, Ethan, and a handful of others," he said. "But organizations like this don't survive for 10 years without help." I immediately thought about the police reports, the missing evidence, the investigations that ended too quickly. Someone inside the system had been protecting them. The question was who? 2 days later, investigators got their answer. One of Richard's financial coordinators agreed to cooperate. Her testimony revealed a name none of us expected. Detective Alan Mercer. My stomach dropped. Mercer had supervised parts of Sarah's accident investigation. He was also connected to 2 previous victim cases. According to the witness, Mercer received regular payments through intermediaries in exchange for steering investigations away from Richard's network. Suddenly, years of unanswered questions made sense. Cases closed too quickly, evidence disappearing, witnesses ignored, families dismissed. Richard hadn't just built a criminal organization, he had built protection around it. The arrests that followed shook the entire investigation. Mercer wasn't the only corrupt official. Several others were identified across different jurisdictions. Some resigned immediately, others were arrested. The deeper investigators dug, the uglier the picture became. Then came the development none of us saw coming. Ethan requested a private meeting with me. The FBI strongly advised against it. My attorney advised against it. Daniel practically begged me not to go. But after thinking about it all night, I agreed. The meeting took place inside a secure federal facility. 2 agents remained nearby at all times. When Ethan entered the room, I barely recognized him. The confident, polished man everyone admired was gone. He looked exhausted, older, smaller. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "I'm sorry about Sarah." Rage surged through me so quickly, I almost stood up. "Don't." My voice came out colder than I intended. Ethan looked away. "You have every right to hate me." "Hate you?" I leaned forward. "My daughter trusted you." He lowered his head. "I know. She loved you." He closed his eyes. "I know. And you sat in a meeting discussing whether she should live or die." For the first time, genuine emotion appeared on his face. Not grief, not guilt, fear. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that." I laughed bitterly. "That's your defense?" Ethan shook his head. "You don't understand, Richard. Then help me understand." For nearly an hour, Ethan talked. He described how Richard identified wealthy targets, how relationships were cultivated, how money moved through shell companies, how victims were manipulated into granting access to assets. Most of what he said matched evidence investigators already had. Then he revealed something new. Sarah had never been intended as a target originally. She was supposed to be different. Ethan genuinely fell in love with her. At least that's what he claimed. But over time, Richard discovered Sarah's financial value and began pressuring Ethan to exploit the relationship. At first, Ethan resisted. Then he gave in. Little by little, one compromise at a time. One lie at a time. One transfer at a time. Eventually, he became part of the machine. I wanted to dismiss everything as manipulation. Another performance. Another lie. But one detail kept bothering me. Ethan wasn't trying to make himself look innocent. He openly admitted his role. He admitted helping move money, admitted lying to Sarah, admitted attending the lodge meeting. Yet there was one thing he denied repeatedly. "I didn't kill her." I stared at him. "Then who did?" Ethan's answer came immediately. "Richard ordered it." The room went silent. "Ordered what?" I asked. Ethan swallowed hard. The brake line. Every muscle in my body locked. "What did you say?" His voice barely rose above a whisper. "Richard had someone tamper with her vehicle." My vision blurred. For months I had imagined dozens of possibilities. Hearing the truth spoken aloud felt worse than any of them. Ethan continued speaking. Richard believed Sarah had become an existential threat. The will, the evidence, the federal contacts she planned to reach. She knew too much. According to Ethan, once Richard made the decision, nobody argued anymore. Not Vanessa, not the others, not even Ethan. His silence condemned Sarah as surely as any weapon. When the meeting ended, I felt emotionally drained. But the worst was still coming. Later that evening, investigators reviewed new intelligence gathered from Ethan's testimony. During the briefing, one agent suddenly received a message and left the room. He returned moments later, looking grim. The lead investigator immediately stood up. "What's wrong?" The agent hesitated before answering. "We just intercepted communications." My pulse quickened. "From who?" The answer chilled the room. "Richard's people." Silence followed. Then the agent continued. "They know Ethan is cooperating." The investigator's expression darkened. "How?" "We don't know yet." A knot formed in my stomach. Someone was still leaking information. Despite all the arrests, despite federal involvement, despite everything, Richard still had eyes inside the system. Then the agent delivered the worst news of all. The leak happened less than 2 hours ago. Every person in the room understood the implication immediately. Someone close to the investigation was helping Richard. And if that person learned where Ethan was being held before he testified, Sarah's killer might never face justice. After the meeting ended, I couldn't stop thinking about what the FBI agent had said. Someone inside the investigation was leaking information, despite the arrests, despite the evidence, despite the fact that Richard was sitting in federal custody. He still had access to information he shouldn't have known. That meant the danger wasn't over. It had simply changed shape. For the first time since Sarah died, the threat wasn't hidden in the shadows. It was inside the very system trying to stop it. The next morning, federal agents transferred Ethan to an undisclosed location. Only a handful of people knew where he was being held. The goal was simple: keep him alive long enough to testify. According to prosecutors, his testimony could connect Richard directly to multiple crimes that the recordings alone might not fully prove. Without Ethan, Richard would still face serious charges. With Ethan, the entire organization could collapse. Unfortunately, Richard understood that too. Over the next 48 hours, investigators monitored unusual communications between several individuals already linked to the network. None of the messages mentioned Ethan directly. They didn't need to. The language was coded. References to unfinished business, loose ends, the witness. Every message pointed in the same direction. Someone was preparing to act. During one briefing, the lead investigator showed me photographs recovered from Richard's archive. Most involved financial transactions and meetings. Then one image caught my attention immediately. Sarah was sitting alone inside a coffee shop. She had no idea the photograph was being taken. The timestamp showed it was captured 3 weeks before her death. My stomach tightened. There were more photographs. Sarah entering her office. Sarah leaving her gym. Sarah visiting her attorney. Someone had been tracking her movements long before the crash. This wasn't a sudden decision. It wasn't panic. They were watching her, studying her, measuring how much she knew. Rage burned inside me. Every new piece of evidence revealed how isolated Sarah had been during those final weeks. She was fighting people who had resources, money, and influence. Yet she never stopped. She never backed down. Later that day, Marcus contacted the FBI again. This time, he had something important. While reviewing old encrypted backups, he found a file Richard considered too sensitive to store with the rest of the evidence. The file contained internal communications from the week Sarah died. Agents decrypted it that evening. What they found changed everything. Until that moment, investigators believed Richard ordered Sarah's death after the lodge meeting. The new messages suggested something even darker. Sarah wasn't supposed to die immediately. According to multiple communications between Richard and Vanessa, the original plan was to pressure Sarah into signing documents that would transfer control of certain assets before she went public. They wanted her frightened, isolated, discredited. But Sarah refused. She accelerated her meetings with attorneys. She contacted Daniel Ross. She gathered evidence faster than expected. And then one message appeared, a message sent by Ethan himself. The words were short, cold, unforgettable. She knows too much. We are out of time. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Every remaining doubt disappeared. Ethan wasn't a reluctant participant. He wasn't trapped. He wasn't merely following orders. He helped push the decision forward. Sarah died because the people closest to her valued money more than her life. That night, I visited her grave again. The cemetery was quiet. A cold wind moved through the trees. I stood there looking at her headstone and remembering the last conversation we ever had. She called me 2 days before she died. We talked about ordinary things. A restaurant she wanted me to try. A television show she thought I would enjoy. Before hanging up, she told me she loved me. At the time, it felt routine. Now, I replayed those words constantly, wishing I had known they would be the last. As I stood there, my phone vibrated. The call came from the lead investigator. His voice sounded tense. "George, we have a situation." My stomach immediately tightened. What happened? There was an attempt. Every muscle in my body locked. On Ethan? Yes. According to the investigator, a maintenance contractor assigned to the secure facility had attempted to gain access to a restricted area using forged credentials. He was stopped before reaching Ethan. Under questioning, the man refused to cooperate, but investigators found enough evidence to establish one thing. The attempt wasn't random. Someone had paid him. Someone still wanted Ethan silenced. The following morning brought another breakthrough. Financial analysts finally identified where much of the missing money had gone. The total amount shocked even the investigators. Tens of millions of dollars had moved through Richard's network over the years. Hidden accounts, fake consulting firms, investment scams, fraudulent partnerships. The scale of the operation was far larger than anyone imagined. Yet one discovery stood above all the others. Several payments were linked directly to Detective Alan Mercer. More importantly, one payment occurred the morning after Sarah's death, a reward. My hands clenched into fists as I read the report. They didn't just cover up her murder, they got paid for it. For the first time, prosecutors became confident they could pursue racketeering charges against the entire network. The case was growing stronger every day, but so was the pressure. Media coverage intensified. Reporters uncovered connections between multiple victims. Families began coming forward. Public attention exploded. Richard's attorneys fought aggressively to suppress evidence. Vanessa's legal team attempted to challenge every search warrant. The battle had officially moved into the open. Then, late one evening, the lead investigator arrived at my house in person. His expression told me something significant had happened. He placed a folder on my kitchen table. We found the final piece. My pulse quickened. What is it? He opened the folder and slid a photograph toward me. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then realization hit. It was a repair invoice, dated 2 days before Sarah's death. The vehicle listed on the document was hers. The name of the mechanic was unfamiliar, but the signature authorizing the work was not Ethan's. The investigator looked directly at me. We found the man who worked on the vehicle. My heart pounded, and the investigator's expression hardened. He's ready to testify. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. After months of suspicion, evidence, recordings, financial trails, and hidden files, someone was finally prepared to tell the jury exactly what happened to Sarah's brakes. And according to the investigator, the mechanic wasn't only willing to testify, he was willing to identify the person who paid him. The moment the investigator told me they had found the mechanic, I knew the case had entered a completely different stage. Up until then, everything pointed toward Ethan and Richard. We had financial records, secret recordings, witness statements, hidden accounts, but defense attorneys could still attack much of that evidence. They could claim conversations were taken out of context. They could argue witnesses were cooperating only to reduce their own sentences. They could create doubt. What they couldn't easily explain away was a mechanic who physically worked on Sarah's vehicle and was prepared to testify under oath. The meeting took place 2 days later, inside a secure federal building. The mechanic's name was Victor Ramirez. He looked terrified. Not guilty. Terrified. The moment he entered the room, it became obvious he had been living in fear for months. He kept looking over his shoulder, kept checking the door, kept asking investigators whether his family was protected. Finally, after repeated assurances, he began talking. His voice shook as he described the events leading up to Sarah's death. 2 days before the crash, Ethan brought Sarah's SUV into the shop. According to Ethan, there was a minor issue with the braking system. Nothing unusual, nothing urgent. Victor performed a routine inspection and found no serious problems. That should have been the end of it. But later that evening, Ethan returned alone. He offered Victor a large amount of cash, more money than Victor normally earned in several weeks. In exchange, Ethan wanted a specific modification made to the brake line. Victor immediately refused. He knew exactly what Ethan was asking. The request wasn't maintenance, it wasn't repair, it was sabotage. Victor claimed he told Ethan to leave. According to his testimony, Ethan appeared nervous rather than angry. He left without arguing. At least, that's what Victor thought. The next day, a different man arrived. Victor recognized him immediately from photographs investigators later showed him. Richard Haynes. Unlike Ethan, Richard didn't negotiate. He didn't persuade. He didn't offer explanations. He offered money first, then he offered consequences. By the end of the conversation, Victor understood exactly what was being asked of him. More importantly, he understood what might happen if he refused. His family lived nearby. His daughter attended a local school. Richard knew details nobody should have known. Victor broke down during testimony. He admitted he made the modification. He admitted accepting the money. He admitted spending every day since Sarah's death wishing he had gone directly to the police. The room remained silent as he spoke. No one interrupted. No one judged him. We all understood the truth. Sarah's death wasn't caused by a single monster. It was caused by a chain of decisions made by people who chose fear, greed, or convenience over morality. When Victor finished, prosecutors knew they finally had what they needed. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan requested another meeting. This time he wasn't negotiating. He wasn't bargaining. He wanted to provide additional information. The investigators reluctantly agreed. What Ethan revealed shocked everyone. According to him, Richard had been preparing an escape plan for years. Hidden accounts in foreign countries, secondary identities, emergency cash reserves, multiple properties purchased through intermediaries. Richard never trusted anyone completely, including his own associates. He expected betrayal eventually. Ethan claimed Richard had once told him, "Every empire falls. The smart ones prepare before the collapse." Investigators immediately began tracing the information. Within hours, several international financial institutions were contacted. Asset freezes were requested. Warrants expanded. The operation that once appeared untouchable was beginning to crumble. Meanwhile, public attention continued growing. National news outlets picked up the story. Families connected to earlier victims began speaking publicly. Several reopened investigations. Former associates started cooperating. The walls were closing in from every direction. Yet despite all of that, Richard remained strangely calm. During interviews, he barely spoke. He never panicked, never raised his voice, never argued. According to investigators, he behaved like a man who still believed he could win. That confidence bothered me. Men facing life in prison usually don't remain that relaxed unless they know something others don't. 3 days later, I finally learned why. The lead investigator arrived at my house just after sunset. His expression immediately told me the news wasn't good. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and placed a file in front of me. "We found another leak," he said. My stomach dropped. "Who?" He opened the file. Inside were photographs, financial records, and communication logs. The person wasn't a police officer, wasn't a politician, wasn't even someone directly involved in law enforcement. The leak came from inside the prosecutor's office. For several seconds, I couldn't process what I was hearing. The investigator explained that a senior administrative employee had been secretly passing information to intermediaries connected to Richard's network. Court schedules, witness movements, evidence updates. Not major information. Small pieces. Just enough to help Richard stay one step ahead. The betrayal sent shockwaves through the case. Suddenly, every security protocol was reviewed. Every communication audited. Every witness relocation reassessed. Then came the worst part. The leak had occurred before Victor agreed to testify, meaning someone already knew his identity. My blood ran cold. "Is he safe?" I asked. The investigator hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. Earlier that afternoon, Victor's workshop had been set on fire. Fortunately, nobody was injured, but the message couldn't have been clearer. Richard's network wasn't finished fighting. They were still trying to intimidate witnesses, still trying to destroy evidence, still trying to survive. For the first time in weeks, I felt genuine fear again. Not for myself, for the people helping us. For Daniel, for Marcus, for Victor, for anyone standing between Richard and freedom. Then the investigator handed me another document. "Read the last page." I flipped through several reports before reaching the end. What I saw made my heart stop. It was a transcript from a recently intercepted prison phone call connected to Richard. Most of the conversation was coded and vague. Then one sentence appeared. A sentence investigators highlighted in red. "If Ethan talks, release the insurance file." I looked up immediately. "What insurance file?" The investigator's face hardened. "We don't know." A cold silence filled the room. After everything we had uncovered, after every recording, every witness, every hidden account, Richard was still holding something back. Something important enough to use as leverage even now. Something he believed could change everything. And somewhere out there, hidden from investigators, was a file Richard had protected for years. A file he called insurance. For the next several days, the entire investigation revolved around one question. What was the insurance file? After everything we had already uncovered, it was difficult to imagine there could still be something significant hidden from us. We had financial records, witnesses, audio recordings, corrupt officials, evidence linking Richard directly to Sarah's death. Yet Richard remained confident. Even from a federal detention center, he acted like a man holding a final card. Investigators began reviewing every document seized from his properties, businesses, and storage locations. Nothing obvious appeared. No folder named insurance. No hidden account using that name. No digital archive. It was as if the file didn't exist. But Richard's intercepted phone call proved otherwise. Somewhere, hidden beyond the evidence we already possessed, was something he considered powerful enough to protect himself. 3 days later, Marcus contacted investigators with an unexpected theory. Years earlier, Richard frequently referred to sensitive leverage files as insurance. The purpose wasn't financial, it was protection. Richard collected information on people around him, partners, lawyers, officials, associates, anyone who might become useful one day. If someone betrayed him, Richard could destroy them. The theory immediately shifted the investigation. The insurance file wasn't money, it was blackmail. Suddenly, Richard's confidence made sense. If he possessed damaging information about influential people, he still had bargaining power. The FBI launched a new search. Every communication recovered from Richard's archive was re-examined. Analysts worked around the clock. Then, they found a clue hidden inside an encrypted note recovered from Vanessa's laptop. The note contained a sequence of coordinates and a reference to an abandoned hunting property owned by one of Richard's shell companies. The property sat nearly 4 hours from the city, deep in a wooded area rarely visited by anyone. A federal search warrant was obtained immediately. The following morning, agents searched the cabin. At first, they found nothing. The building appeared empty. Abandoned furniture, dust, broken windows. Then an agent noticed recent tool marks beneath a fireplace. Behind a concealed steel panel was a small fireproof safe. Inside the safe were several hard drives. One folder on one of those drives carried a simple label: insurance. When investigators opened it, the room reportedly went silent. The file contained years of recordings, photographs, financial records, and private communications involving dozens of individuals. Some were businessmen, some were attorneys, some held public office. Others worked inside law enforcement. Richard had spent years collecting leverage. He recorded meetings without permission, saved confidential conversations, archived evidence of crimes committed by others. Anyone who helped him eventually became vulnerable to him. For the first time, investigators understood why Richard had survived so long. He wasn't merely paying people, he was controlling them. Then, they found something that changed my understanding of Sarah's death forever. Buried inside the archive was a folder named Ethan. The folder contained years of recordings between Richard and my son-in-law. I sat beside investigators as they reviewed portions of the material. At first, it confirmed much of what we already knew: financial discussions, target selection, asset transfers. Then, we reached recordings from the months before Sarah died. The version Ethan had told investigators began falling apart. He claimed he loved Sarah, claimed he resisted Richard's pressure, claimed he never wanted her harmed. But the recordings painted a different picture. In multiple conversations, Ethan discussed Sarah's growing suspicions. He worried about losing access to her money. He worried about exposure. Most disturbing of all, he never once expressed concern for Sarah herself, only for what she might cost him. My chest tightened as recording after recording revealed the truth. Ethan wasn't trapped. He wasn't manipulated. He wasn't a weak man pushed into bad decisions. He was an active participant who valued wealth more than the woman who trusted him. Then investigators reached the final recording. The conversation occurred the night before Sarah died. Richard asked one question: "If she goes through with this tomorrow, what happens?" Ethan answered immediately: "Everything falls apart." Richard remained silent. Then Ethan spoke again. The words hit me harder than anything I had heard throughout the investigation. "Do whatever you have to do." The room became completely silent. Nobody needed to explain the significance. Nobody needed to interpret it. For months, prosecutors had built a case around conspiracy and financial motives. Now, they possessed direct evidence of Ethan approving whatever action Richard deemed necessary. Any remaining sympathy for him disappeared. The following week, prosecutors confronted Ethan with the recording. According to investigators, he looked physically ill when he heard his own voice. His cooperation agreement was immediately re-evaluated. For the first time since his arrest, Ethan realized he might spend the rest of his life in prison. Meanwhile, the insurance archive created chaos far beyond our case. Additional arrests followed. Public officials resigned. Several investigations were reopened. News coverage exploded across the country. What began with Sarah's death was now exposing corruption on a scale nobody anticipated. Yet despite everything, one final obstacle remained. Richard's trial was approaching. His attorneys continued fighting aggressively. Every witness would be challenged. Every piece of evidence attacked. Prosecutors believed they had enough to win, but they wanted something undeniable, something no jury could ignore. Then Marcus remembered one final detail. Years earlier, Richard occasionally carried a personal recorder separate from the organization's archives. He never trusted technology completely. He preferred having copies under his direct control. Most people assumed those recordings disappeared. Marcus believed otherwise. Investigators followed the lead and eventually recovered a small encrypted device hidden inside a bank safety deposit box, registered under a false identity. The contents were devastating. Among dozens of recordings was one captured only hours after Sarah's crash. Richard, Vanessa, and Ethan met privately to discuss the aftermath. They believed the death would be ruled an accident. They discussed insurance payouts, media attention, Sarah's unfinished will. Then Richard raised a glass and made a toast. To problem solved. Laughter followed, including Ethan's. I felt physically sick listening to it. For months, I had imagined justice, imagined accountability. But hearing the people responsible celebrate my daughter's death revealed a level of cruelty I hadn't fully understood before. Prosecutors immediately classified the recording as one of the strongest pieces of evidence in the entire case. Richard's legal team knew it too. 2 days later, something unexpected happened. Richard requested a meeting with federal prosecutors. Rumors spread throughout the investigation. Some believed he wanted a plea deal. Others thought he planned to negotiate. The truth was stranger. Richard wasn't offering information. He wasn't surrendering. He was making a threat. According to investigators, Richard claimed that if prosecutors continued pursuing the case, additional insurance files would be released publicly, files capable of damaging powerful people across multiple states. For the first time since his arrest, Richard finally showed desperation. The empire he spent years building was collapsing around him. But even then, he was willing to burn everything to the ground rather than accept defeat. That night, I visited Sarah's grave again. The trial was only weeks away. The truth was finally out. The evidence was overwhelming. Yet standing there beside her headstone, I realized something. Justice wasn't guaranteed. Powerful people had escaped consequences before. Richard had done it for years. The fight wasn't over yet. As I turned to leave, my phone rang. The call came from the lead prosecutor. His voice sounded urgent. "George, we have a problem." My stomach tightened instantly. "What now?" There was a pause. Then he delivered the one piece of news nobody expected. Richard just disappeared. The moment I heard the words, "Richard disappeared," I thought I had misheard. That wasn't possible. Richard Haynes wasn't out on bail. He wasn't under house arrest. He was in federal custody awaiting trial. Yet the prosecutor's voice remained calm and deliberate. "He's gone." My stomach dropped. "How?" There was a long silence. "We're still trying to figure that out." The next 24 hours became absolute chaos. News of Richard's disappearance was kept from the public, while federal agencies launched an emergency manhunt. Every transportation hub was monitored: airports, train stations, private airfields, border crossings. Investigators reviewed security footage from the detention facility minute by minute. Eventually, the truth emerged. Richard hadn't escaped through force. He hadn't tunneled out. He hadn't bribed a guard with cash. He escaped because someone inside the system helped him. A transport order had been forged. Documentation had been altered. By the time officials realized what happened, Richard was already gone. The discovery triggered another wave of arrests. Several employees were detained for questioning. One eventually confessed to receiving payments through accounts connected to Richard's organization. Even behind bars, Richard's influence had remained powerful enough to buy loyalty. But this time, things were different. The entire country was watching. Federal agencies flooded resources into the search. The insurance files had already exposed too many people. Richard was no longer merely a criminal defendant. He was a national embarrassment. They needed him found, fast. Meanwhile, prosecutors faced a new problem. The trial was approaching, but the central figure in the conspiracy had vanished. Defense attorneys immediately began filing motions. Some argued evidence should be delayed. Others claimed the prosecution's case was compromised. For the first time since Sarah's death, I felt fear replacing confidence. We had come so far, too far to lose now. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan broke, completely. According to investigators, the news of Richard's disappearance terrified him more than prison ever had. For years, Richard had controlled him through money, secrets, and fear. Now Richard was free, somewhere, and Ethan knew exactly what that meant. If Richard escaped permanently, every witness became a target. Every loose end became a liability, including Ethan himself. 2 days later, Ethan requested another meeting. This time, I almost refused. I was tired of hearing explanations, tired of excuses, tired of watching him rewrite history. But the prosecutors insisted the information might be important. When Ethan entered the interview room, he looked worse than ever. His hands shook, dark circles surrounded his eyes. For the first time since his arrest, he genuinely looked afraid. He didn't waste time. I know where Richard will go. Every person in the room immediately focused on him. Ethan explained that years earlier, Richard purchased a remote property through one of his hidden companies. It wasn't listed in any known records because ownership had passed through multiple layers of shell corporations. Richard considered it his emergency exit, a place to disappear if everything collapsed. Investigators moved immediately. Within hours, surveillance teams were deployed. The property sat deep in the mountains near the Canadian border, isolated, difficult to access, perfect for someone trying to vanish. For nearly 36 hours, agents watched the location. Nothing happened. No vehicles, no movement, no signs of life. Then, shortly before dawn on the second day, a black SUV appeared on a gravel road leading toward the cabin. Federal agents moved into position. Additional teams closed surrounding routes. Drones monitored the area from above. The operation unfolded quietly, methodically. Then the SUV stopped. One man stepped out. Richard. Even from a distance, investigators recognized him immediately. The man who had spent a decade destroying lives finally looked vulnerable. Older, tired, smaller than the image he projected for years. But he was still dangerous. Agents moved in. Richard attempted to retreat into the cabin. He made it only a few steps before armed teams surrounded the property. According to reports, he stood silently for several seconds before raising his hands. Just like that, the empire ended. No dramatic shootout. No escape across the border. No last-minute miracle. Richard Haynes was back in custody. The news became public within hours. National headlines exploded. Families of victims celebrated. Reporters flooded every courthouse connected to the case. For the first time, it felt like justice might actually happen. Then prosecutors delivered another surprise. They intended to play the post-crash recording during trial. The recording where Richard toasted Sarah's death. The recording where Ethan laughed. Defense attorneys fought desperately to exclude it. They argued prejudice, context, procedure. None of it worked. The judge ruled the jury would hear everything. Every word, every laugh. Every detail. Trial preparations accelerated. Witnesses were finalized. Evidence organized. Security expanded. Then, only a week before opening statements, I received a call from Daniel. His voice sounded emotional. "You need to see this." We met at his attorney's office. Waiting there was a woman I had never met before. She introduced herself as Laura Benson. Her younger sister had died 6 years earlier, under circumstances remarkably similar to Sarah's. For years, Laura believed the death was a tragic accident. Then the investigation into Richard uncovered hidden files connected to her sister's case. Tears filled her eyes as she thanked me. Not because I had solved anything personally, but because refusing to let Sarah's death be dismissed had opened the door for dozens of families to finally learn the truth. By the end of the week, more families came forward. More names surfaced. More stories emerged. The scale of Richard's destruction became impossible to ignore. Sarah wasn't just another victim. She was the person who came closest to exposing everything while she was still alive. That realization stayed with me as the trial finally began. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled every available seat. Victims' families sat shoulder to shoulder. Richard entered wearing an expensive suit and the same calm expression he always wore. Ethan entered separately. This time there was no confidence left in him at all. As opening statements began, I looked around the room and understood something important. The trial was no longer about one murder. It was about years of lies, years of corruption, years of stolen lives. Then the prosecutor stood before the jury and delivered the first sentence of what would become the most important trial of our lives. And as I watched Richard's face for the first time since Sarah died, I realized something else. For the first time in years, he looked uncertain. The trial lasted nearly 3 months. By the time the prosecution presented its final witness, the courtroom felt less like a legal proceeding and more like the public collapse of an empire. Every day brought new revelations. Every day exposed another lie, another victim, another betrayal. The jury listened to financial experts explain how millions of dollars moved through shell companies designed to hide fraud. Former associates described how Richard built his network, one compromised person at a time. Federal agents detailed years of corruption that stretched across multiple states. Families of victims sat in silence as photographs of their loved ones appeared on screens throughout the courtroom. Some cried openly. Others simply stared ahead, exhausted after years of unanswered questions. Then came the testimony everyone had been waiting for. Ethan Walker took the stand. The room became completely silent as he walked toward the witness box. There was no confidence left in him, no charm, no carefully crafted image. The man who once fooled everyone finally looked exactly what he was, a coward who had traded his conscience for money. Under oath, Ethan admitted to participating in financial fraud. He admitted to lying to investigators. He admitted attending the lodge meeting where Sarah's fate was discussed. Most importantly, he admitted knowing that Richard intended to stop Sarah before she could expose the organization. The defense tried desperately to portray Ethan as an unreliable witness, but by then, it didn't matter. The recordings existed. The financial records existed. The emails existed. The jury wasn't hearing one man's story. They were seeing an entire mountain of evidence pointing in the same direction. Then prosecutors played the recording recovered from Richard's hidden archive, the one recorded after Sarah died, the one where Richard raised a glass and toasted to problems solved, the one where Ethan laughed. The moment the audio echoed through the courtroom, I saw several jurors visibly react. Some shook their heads. One woman wiped away tears. No explanation could erase what they had just heard. No attorney could explain away celebration after a young woman's death. The defense knew it too. Richard testified in his own defense near the end of the trial. It was a mistake. For years, he had controlled every room he entered, every conversation, every person around him. But inside that courtroom, the evidence controlled him. Under cross-examination, his confidence slowly cracked. Contradictions emerged. Timelines stopped matching. Financial records exposed lies he couldn't explain. Then prosecutors confronted him with the recording from the night before Sarah died. For the first time during the entire trial, Richard looked rattled. The jurors noticed. Everyone did. After closing arguments, deliberations began. Those were the longest 3 days of my life. I spent most of the time sitting at home staring at old photographs of Sarah, pictures from birthdays, family vacations, her college graduation, her wedding day. Looking at those images hurt, but they also reminded me why I started this fight. This was never about revenge. It was about truth. Sarah deserved the truth. Every victim deserved the truth. On the third afternoon, the jury reached a verdict. The courtroom was packed when everyone returned. Reporters filled every seat. Victims' families lined the gallery. I sat beside Daniel Ross, both of us barely breathing as the four-person stood. The first verdict was read for Richard Haynes. Guilty. Then another. Guilty. Then another. Guilty. The pattern continued until every major charge had been confirmed. Fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, witness, intimidation. Multiple counts connected to the deaths that had fueled the organization for years. Richard remained expressionless, but for the first time since his arrest, his eyes revealed fear. Real fear, the kind no amount of money could fix. Then came Ethan, guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom like thunder. Ethan lowered his head and closed his eyes. I felt no satisfaction watching him, only sadness. Sarah loved that man once. She trusted him. She believed he would protect her. Instead, he became part of the reason she never came home. Sentencing occurred several weeks later. Richard received multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. Several associates received lengthy prison terms. Corrupt officials lost their careers, pensions, and freedom. Ethan received decades in federal prison. He would spend the rest of his life growing old behind bars. When the proceedings ended, reporters rushed outside searching for statements. Families embraced each other. Some cried, some celebrated. Others simply stood quietly, finally free from years of uncertainty. But my most important moment came later. Much later, a month after sentencing, I visited Sarah's grave again. This time I wasn't carrying questions. I wasn't carrying anger. I wasn't carrying guilt. I carried a small wooden box. Inside were copies of the final court judgments and a photograph of the charity foundation that had just opened in her name. Using assets recovered from the criminal network, the courts approved funding for programs supporting victims of financial exploitation and fraud. It wasn't enough to undo the damage. Nothing ever could be. But it meant something good would exist, because Sarah refused to stay silent. I knelt beside her grave and placed the photograph against the headstone. For a long time, I simply sat there, remembering her laugh, her stubbornness, her kindness, the way she always called on Sundays, the way she never stopped fighting once she believed something was right. Eventually, I looked up at the sky and smiled for the first time in many months. "You won, sweetheart," I said quietly. "They didn't bury the truth with you." A gentle breeze moved through the cemetery. The sun dipped below the horizon. And as I stood and began walking back toward my truck, I realized something I hadn't felt since before Sarah died. Peace. The people responsible had lost everything. The truth had come to light. Justice had been served. And the daughter I loved had changed countless lives, not because of how she died, but because of the courage she showed while she was alive. For the first time since that terrible phone call telling me she was gone, I finally felt ready to move forward. Not forgetting. Never forgetting. But moving forward. Because Sarah's story was no longer a story about death. It was a story about truth. And in the end, truth won.